David Williams with Jesus Ministries. We're going to get into a very important topic as culture around us steamrolls ahead in a certain direction. We want to make sure that we are supporting the things that God is supporting and in total agreement with Him. So we're going to discuss again the topic of tattooing and the marking of the body. It's still a very popular practice, and it's condemned in Leviticus 19:28, which states, "You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. I am the Lord." So don't make any cuttings in your flesh in memorial for the dead, and don't print any marks upon you. So it's a forbidden form of expressing grief, and it's a forbidden form of expressing an idea or belief that you have. Scarring your flesh is a forbidden form according to this verse. People discredit this verse because they look at verse 27, which says, "You shall not round the corners of your heads," which is another form of physical mutilation that many of the tribal nations do internationally. "You shall not round the corners of your heads, neither shall you mar the corners of your beard." And rounding the corners of your head can also be described as tapering the hairline. And we know that when it says don't mar the corners of your beards, the corners of your beards classify as your sideburns. And so that was a law that God gave to the Jews to distinguish them from the other nations, like circumcision. The rounding of the corners of the heads, if we look at it in respect to the actual mutilating of the skin, that classifies as verse 28. If we look at it as the tapering of the hair, you might be able to say, okay, well, maybe that's what that means. What we do know is that it was designed to distinguish the Jews from the Gentiles. Now, because we accept the cutting of the facial hair in our modern times, many have said verse 28 is also acceptable. Since cutting our facial hair is good, then cutting the flesh must also be good. But what does verse 29 tell us? It says, "Do not prostitute your daughter to cause her to be a whore, lest the land fall to whoredom, and the land be full of wickedness." So if people justify tattooing because they say, well, cutting your beard is okay, and that's in that same area where it says you shouldn't tattoo yourself. So if cutting your beard is okay, then getting a tattoo is okay. If we follow that logic, then prostituting our daughters must also be okay. Trading our daughters' beauty for money with lust as that transaction, that must also be acceptable. So we know that just because cutting our beards is an acceptable modern practice, that doesn't justify the cutting of the flesh any more than it justifies prostituting our daughters. The reason why people are trying to justify the cutting of the flesh is because they misunderstand God's command. And God doesn't want us to misunderstand that command, because the spirit of the Antichrist is at work in our culture to desensitize us to the point that we'll receive a mark in our right hand or in our foreheads. So tattooing as a culture is exposing people to the mark of the beast. So cutting your flesh is bad. God does not allow it. God never allowed that outside of circumcision or the solidifying of a slave, a Gentile slave. So when it comes to the cutting of the flesh for the dead, there is no justification for it in the Bible. And when it comes to the printing of the marks on you, there is no justification for it, just like there's no justification for prostituting your daughter. There is no New Testament condemnation in the slightest about cutting your facial hair. Not in the slightest. Concerning The prostitution of our daughters. We know Jesus said, if I look upon a woman to lust after her, I've committed adultery with her already in my heart. We know that fornication is still something that Jesus condemns. We also know that our bodies are the temples of the Holy Ghost, and we're not our own. So the New Testament makes that very, very clear. So we've got to embrace the truth of God, abandon the lies of the devil, in order for us to truly experience the fullness of what God has for us, and to escape this coming order and everything that is trying to prepare us to embrace it. This is David Williams with Jesus Ministries.